There we are. We are live. And so welcome everyone. I'm going to take a few moments as always, as usual, just to allow you to come on so that we all start at the same time and you don't miss out the beginning of the webinar. Welcome everyone and welcome Dr. Klinghardt. Welcome Dietrich.
Thank you, Daniela.
So tonight our webinar is about the role of retroviruses in chronic illness, how we can maybe stop the activation of retroviruses, what is the best recommendation from Dr. K. And then, yes, we will be ready to start in a few more moments. And in the meantime, I just wanted to see if you have anything else to share apart from starting your webinar on the retroviruses.
Yeah. Yeah, we've our team at the Sophia Health Institute, we gave a instructional course about 9 months ago on basic instructions for a liver flush and the importance of that. And so I want to talk for a moment about that. You know, right now we sort of have a worldwide viral issue going on. But whether, you know, it's a virus or that and all the details don't really matter. But what we do know is that this particular virus that we're dealing with right now, plus many of the older viruses, the DNA viruses like herpes simplex or Epstein-Barr, all of them get eliminated through the liver into the bile ducts, from the bile ducts into the small intestine, and then on the way out. And the overlooked, most important antiviral defense is to keep that system fluid, you know, where the liver cells take up viral material, break down the viruses into smaller parts and shove them out on the other end into the biliary system and out the colon. And so we've, especially Dr. Ko, who's a brilliant physician working with me at the Sophia Health Institute, did a lot of research into this. And then there's, of course, Kim Todd, that some of you know her. She is probably the most experienced liver flush person in the world. She's done it for 40 years. And so we realized in order for as a central part of our health, we need to keep the liver system and the biliary system clean and smooth and running. And it's not enough to take some liver herbs. Some of you know we have some fantastic herbal products, but in the current crisis, all of our livers are overwhelmed. The liver flush is a way to stimulate the parasitic movement in the bile ducts that squeezes out old sludgy bile and then allows the liver cells that are there for detoxification and part of the immune system to properly take up from the bloodstream side, to take up viral material, bacterial material, to take up toxins, process them, and shove them out the other end into the biliary system. And then with the appropriate binders on board in the intestinal tract, everything comes out very quickly. So in a more scientific way, we sort of updated the instructions of how to do this properly. And this will be a 12-day program. I will be the one introducing it, but it's largely Dr. Ko, Dr. Adams, who works with us, and Kim Todd, who will take you by the hand and lead you through a 12-day protocol. We come out healthier and cleaner at the other end and become a master at mastering the modern version of a liver flush that has huge meaning for our time right now. I consider it the most central part of self-help that you need to learn and need to know about. And so Daniela will give instructions of how to register if you are interested in it. And I hope that we see you there.
Yes, I can put the link for anyone that is interested and wants to book with Sophia Health Institute. Lucinda and I will be putting the links on the chat. on both chats. So I just wanted to give a little reminder. Today is not a Q&A session. Today is a presentation from Dr. Klinghardt on retroviruses for those that are coming on now. So if there are any questions, I can collect them and keep them for next week. Otherwise, just enjoy the presentation, and maybe Dietrich at the end, if you can make a little resume of what you've just presented about the liver flush, that would be great. So people that were not on yet will be able to hear it again. So yes, we're ready to start then.
I forgot to say an important thing. So this liver flush instructional seminar will be online, but it will have some live parts in it where you can ask questions to the experts and become an expert yourself by the end of it. So,
Dietrich, sorry, before you start, we had few problems with the sound. So there is a possibility that I will interrupt you again, and then we do something about it, which I have in mind. But for now, it seems to have settled. So all good. And yes, I just wanted to say, Annika as well from the Klinghardt Institute is on the chat, so she can also put links there. So we're all here to support any questions that you may have. All right.
Okay. So, yeah, I want to talk to you about my passion over the last couple of years, the retroviruses. And by the way, in order to not rush through this will be at least 2 of our Thursdays, maybe even 3. Yeah, so I will not rush through this like I do in some of the more academic settings where you have to deliver everything in 45 minutes. This is a theme that is so important to understand that I want to take my time with it. So here we go. Let me find the pictures that go along with this. And moment. Okay, so the first question is, what the hell are retroviruses? You may have heard the term, but who are they? And then it says here on this first page, there is endogenous and exogenous retroviruses. And then there is a number of conditions associated with medical conditions that you should know about. Okay, so here we go. On the right side, you see the double helix. That's the typical DNA, how a herpes virus, for example, would look like, or Epstein-Barr, or herpes type 6, or cytomegalomy. They all look like that. On the far right side, you see the picture of a single-stranded DNA, which is called RNA. And retroviruses are RNA viruses. By the way, COVID-19 is also an RNA virus. Now, the unique thing, the typical thing that you've all have learned is that the DNA, let's say this is human DNA in the nucleus of the cell, that human DNA is like a library, and then the RNA comes by, lays itself against it, and copies sections of the DNA. And then the RNA floats away and goes to the ribosomes, where it collects amino acids and builds a protein whose building plan was in the DNA. And the enzyme that allows the RNA to read the DNA is called, the beautiful word, transcriptase. It transcribes what is in the DNA. Now let's go to the retroviruses. Retroviruses are a piece of floating RNA that when they enter the cell, they have the ability to talk to this enzyme, the transcriptase, and activate it in the wrong direction. And then it's called reverse transcriptase. That means the enzyme, instead of copying sections from the DNA and informing the rest of the cell with what's going on there, now the reverse transcriptase takes the RNA and shoves it into the DNA. It incorporates it into our DNA. that's the basic mechanism of the HIV virus. That's, of course, the one that most of you have some awareness of. It is a retrovirus, but as I will show you in a moment, there's hundreds of other retroviruses, and most of them are involved in our chronic illnesses. And when you actually learn how to diagnose them and be able to understand them, then there is treatments that you can incorporate into your regular treatment protocols and hugely, dramatically increase your outcomes. So I have everything that I say is supported by good medical literature, and so those of you who decide later on to purchase the PowerPoint, my PowerPoints are not expensive, but it gives you then the ability also to talk to your patients or to give academic lectures using this material. And so let's kind of go to the nitty-gritty of this. So when we look at our DNA, only 2% or so of our DNA are actually used for this process. Sorry, there is a barking in the background that always makes me nervous, but she's okay. So only 2% of the entire DNA in our system is used to build is the blueprint for building of proteins. 98% serve other purposes. 90% of that is the creation of so-called microRNA, that actually these sections of the DNA create small sections of small strands of RNA, and that RNA is used to regulate the 2% of the DNA that is there. I'm always comparing that with medicine. So in England, at least, for every medical doctor, there's at least 20 administrative persons that tell the doctor what to do and what not to do. And our DNA is similar, 2% that actually have the information. And of the remaining 98%, 9% are used to regulate those 2%, which is fascinating. And there's a lot to be said about microRNA. microRNA actually enters our bloodstream, and actually it enters our breath and our sweat. And it's in the field around us, is full of our own microRNA. And the microRNA communicates when it's breathed in by others or attaches to a plant or an animal. It actually tells the DNA what to do. And likewise, if you go in a forest, the forest is full of microRNA from the trees. And as you inhale the vapors of the trees, the tree RNA starts to communicate with your DNA and activates sections of your DNA and inactivates other sections of DNA that shouldn't be active. It's a wonderful dance that happens to the microRNA. But let's focus on the 8% that I haven't mentioned yet. So 8% of our DNA is retroviral DNA. Yeah. So, and where do these retroviruses come from? Well, they've been incorporated in your ancestral DNA probably millions of years ago, or tens of thousands of years ago, or 20 years ago, by being infected with retroviruses. They incorporate themselves in your DNA. And if it happens to be in the testicle or in the ovaries of a woman, then it changes your DNA permanently. So we speak of endogenous retroviruses when they're inherited in this way. And then there is acquired retroviruses. Acquired, and we will see that either through a droplet infection, just like a flu, you can get it, or acquired through vaccines or other methods by which we can introduce retrovirus into a human organism. And we know from HIV, sexual contact can do that, intimacy can do that. And I think I like to say that here again, that the current vaccines, COVID vaccines, are RNA vaccines, at least most of them. There's one DNA vaccine that we haven't seen yet what it does, but most of them are RNA vaccines. That means pieces of RNA are injected into us. And of course, chances are, even though the pharmaceutical industry says it cannot happen, but all the virologists that I talk to say, of course it will happen, that the RNA, if the reverse transcriptase is activated by other retroviruses that are in us, then the vaccine RNA has a very good chance of being integrated in our DNA. And if that, again, is in your ovary or testicles, it changes what you pass on to your children. Yeah, so they will be forever altered unless you use CRISPR or some other technique to remove the retroviruses from there. That will all be coming in the next few decades. I'm kind of almost hoping I won't be there to see it, but that's where we are. By the way, the PowerPoints that I give will always be available to you after the talks from Klinghardt Institute. There's a cost to it, but you can acquire them and then use them for your own research, lecturing, and educating patients. Okay, so here on the right side, that circle, you see the classes and families of retroviruses that so far have been identified. You know, the large groups are the gamma retroviruses, the delta retroviruses, the beta retroviruses. All the other ones are a little bit more sparse, but they're all of these are potentially illness causing. Yeah, and so this is not just HIV. HIV happens to be the standout retroviruses that everybody knows at least the name of now. Okay, so I've put here in the text the beta retroviruses have them subgroups. They're called HERVK. HERV stands for human endogenous retrovirus. Yeah, so these are the ones that we inherit from our parents. There's the K group, the H group, the W group, and so on and so forth. It's not so important for my talk that you know all the differences and what they do. However, I did a little bit of math on this. So if we calculate the length is 8% in our DNA, if we string the retroviruses from one cell together with the length of the retroviral material in another cell, and we do it with all the cells, how long would the retroviral segments be in the DNA? And it would be as long enough to string around our entire planet 150,000 times. I give you this number because if you think you can silence that amount of RNA, or now DNA once it's incorporated, if you think you can silence that by giving a patient 0.4 milligrams of folinic acid, then you're dreaming. Yeah, it takes large amounts of an intervention to silence that system. I use large amounts of B5. I may use for a critical period of time 20, 30, 40 milligrams of methylated folate, and twice a week 5 or 10 milligrams of methyl B12. And yes, you can over-methylate somebody, but not in the situations that I will describe in the illnesses that I describe. So there is a good size, I wrote in the sentence, endogenous retrovirus can be beneficial. And this is an enigma, a question I had since early adulthood. We know when somebody has an organ transplant, let's say you get a transplanted liver, then in order for that to succeed, you have for the rest of your life, you have to take these immunosuppressive drugs, because otherwise your own immune system will eat up the transplanted liver and you die at most within a few weeks of doing that. So my question was, okay, when a woman gets pregnant, that fetus is not identical in the DNA to the mother. In fact, it only has like roughly 50% of the genes of the mother and 50% foreign DNA. How come the immune system is not eliminating immediately the fetus. It should be, the fetus should be the enemy and should be eliminated. And the reason is quite astounding. The fetus, when it is formed, secretes some communication substances that activate retroviral elements that are in the DNA in the lining of the uterus. It activates retroviruses. And retroviruses as a whole are immunosuppressive. So the fetus activates viral material that's embedded in the DNA, that endogenous, that has been there from birth, from the mother had these retroviruses living there from birth, but they were silenced. And so that silencing mechanism is shut off by the fetus. And so retroviruses become active and they suppress the immune system in the uterus so the fetus can grow. I think that's quite fascinating. I'm fascinated by how biology works and how we actually make chronic infections work for us. The other example that everybody knows now is the mitochondria. Mitochondria are bacterial forms that have been incorporated into our system probably 1 million years ago or longer, and without them we couldn't live. So we live with the environment that we're living in, and some aspects of the environment are absolutely crucial for our survival, for our life. Okay, now on the darker side, most retroviruses and retroviral elements that are incorporated in our DNA are illness-causing when they become active. And so this article here, the top one, shows that similar to a pregnancy, activating certain retroviruses, when you have an Epstein-Barr infection, active Epstein-Barr viral infection, that will trigger the activation of certain retroviruses. Here, and this one is the K18 class, that has a whole predictable number of effects. And it is not a resolved issue, but it is suggested in the literature that the chronic fatigue that's associated, not every Epstein-Barr patient has chronic fatigue, but a lot of them do. And the suggestion is it's not the Epstein-Barr that causes the fatigue, but the Epstein-Barr activates retroviruses, which themselves cause the fatigue. The article here at the bottom says the same about cytomegalovirus. The CMV virus induces the human endogenous retrovirus activity. And so this is really important, because most of you have stopped looking there, whether you're practitioners watching this or patients. All of you are familiar with the herpes viruses, herpes simplex type 2, the genital herpes, cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr, herpes type 6, herpes type 8. They're the famous herpes viruses. They're all DNA viruses, have nothing to do with retroviruses, and yet 4 of them, and you will meet the other members in a moment, are known to activate retroviruses. And many symptoms that we usually falsely allocate to these herpes viruses are actually caused by the retroviruses that they activate. And the reason why so often Valtrex and other antivirals don't work is because it's, yes, the Valtrex squishes the herpes simplex virus. However, if the herpes simplex virus is the cause why it activated retroviruses, the Valtrex has no effect against the retroviruses. And so the patient continues to have their symptoms, their herpes zoster symptoms, or their fatigue, or whatever that is. So how do you shut down the retroviral aspect? So lesson number 1 is, I mentioned that already, is vitamin B5 in pretty high doses. I give at least 500 milligrams twice a day. And the other one is to work with one of the methylating agents that we're all familiar with. It's a methylated B12, methylated folate, or S-adenosyl methionine. Those are the three big ones, and there's other smaller players. Okay, here is the article on Hv6 also being able to activate endogenous retroviruses, and actually through a pretty complex mechanism that's outlined up here. Yeah, so Hv6 activates a door in the cell. It's the CD46, and that activates the retroviruses, and then the retroviruses cause selective inflammatory regions in the brain. And that's a really, really important one, because many of you that listen to this have active inflammation in the brain, and overlooking the retroviruses would be a near fatal mistake. It's something you all should look for. The students of mine, the eryt students, we have a wonderful tester. It's the DVD with the frequencies of most retroviruses on it. And so with that, we can very quickly identify retroviral activity. But I give in this talk, I give the more conventional medical diagnostic tools that we have to diagnose retroviral activity. Who remembers, let's go back, who remembers how to treat Epstein-Barr? You may want to take a note. Yeah, so the most powerful item found, including all the medical drugs tested to silence Epstein-Barr, is licorice extract. Nothing, there was no medical drug that tested as well as licorice extract. What's the study about 2012? 2012. No, I'm in the right century. And then the other thing you want to know, CMV, one of the most well-known tricks to treat cytomegalovirus virus is chlorella. Yeah, it's published and is something I've been using for 30 years for CMV. Who knows what the most elegant way is to silence Hv6? That works most of the time. It's published. There's a beautiful book called The Virus Within. And when you follow that in the literature on there, it leads you to a wonderful treatment. And that treatment is freeze-dried garlic. Yeah, and so I recommend in the US, it's from BioPure, 2 capsules with each meal of freeze-dried garlic for about 3 months. And you got beautiful control of Hv6. And then if you combine that with retroviral therapy, which we'll get later, what we do for that, it's a fantastic combo. Yeah. So remember, you want to give chlorella, licorice, and freeze-dried garlic. It's a combination that's very easy to blend into your daily routine. Okay, and here is now one of the first articles on the link of human endogenous retroviruses and autoimmune disease. Yeah, some of you know I did my thesis on autoimmune disease, also had aspects of the autonomic nervous system in it. But here, a clear link that active retroviruses have been found in Sjogren syndrome, that's the dry mouth and dry eyes, rheumatoid arthritis, you know, sort of so many of us physicians have struggled with that. And then now we got the biologics and people get temporary improvements. But, you know, the only good thing I ever saw from it, my first patient who was on one of the modern biologics went straight into liver failure from that. And it was very difficult to recover him. So I'm not a great friend of that. I'm a great friend of diagnosing and treating the retroviruses which are causing it. Okay, and then the last one here on this page is lupus erythematosus, LED. Yeah, that's all the collagen diseases basically. Yeah, the scleroderma, lupus, polyarthritis. There's a couple of them that are in this category, and all of them are suspected today to be caused by retroviruses. And then using anti-inflammatory methods is not the right way to go. To use pain drugs is not the right way to go. Acupuncture, yes. Homeopathy, yes. But pair it with retroviral therapy. Okay, so here's a little bit more of when certain is here about one group of retroviruses, the K group, that's the picture on the right side, if the endogenous retroviruses of the K group are activated, they cause neurodegeneration in the brain and peripheral and central nervous system and cell death. That's a really important one. And then the W group causes oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress short-term can be a good thing because it activates certain factors, healing factors in the brain, but oxidative stress on the long run kills people. And that brings me to one of the major treatments to prevent this. The most published treatment is melatonin. Melatonin in higher doses. And some of you who are my patients know I've prescribed to you 125 milligrams, 250 milligrams, either transdermal or as a rectal suppository. I offer you the literature, so you make up your own mind, when you go through this. But my tip for you is write everything, every tip I write, you should write down. And the eryt people who are listening, you can just simply take any patient who's got cancer or neurological disease or autoimmune disease and test those items first that I'm giving you in this talk. And there will be the most important decisive agents that you would prescribe to this patient. Okay, so in multiple sclerosis, so there is probably the largest number of papers written on a connection between retroviral infection and autoimmune disease. The largest number of papers written is on multiple sclerosis. And so we've been going around the block with that. In MS, I have not found the natural agents that we use. For most other retroviruses, we've been very successful with just natural agents. But in MS, I tend to use the medical drugs, the anti-retroviral drugs, the protease inhibitors, and there's a whole host of them. Sometimes it's needed to go to the heavy guns with that. But the fact that it is suspected that most MS is originally caused by retroviruses, and then when we put that together with the knowledge we have on CCSVI, I will show you in a moment, or in the next talk, I don't know when we're getting there, what CCSVI is, that in MS, patients get these restrictions in the deep neck veins, which are responsible for carrying blood out of the brain back into the body. And when these veins are narrowed, the blood can't flow out of the brain. That means it can't flow into the brain, and you get degeneration in the brain. It's a recognized mechanism, but most neurologists don't want to hear about it and blocked the CCSVI procedure that we had available a couple of years ago. I've developed together with Marco Ruggiero a cream. In America, it's called the Sophia Flow. In England, it's called the circulation cream. That actually comes from other researchers that were before Marco Ruggiero had discovered that with the cream, you can penetrate quite deeply in the neck tissues and reach the regions where the neck veins are inflamed. And they're inflamed because the immune system is attacking the retroviruses that has settled inside the veins. And so by using this cream that activates the antiretroviral part of our immune system, and very often it opens these veins up. There is 2 publications. The original publication was Marco Ruggiero and me, and then 2018, Dr. Antonucci, a friend of ours in Italy who works with autistic kids, tried out the cream on a large number of kids and saw very dramatic improvements in autistic kids with that, because I pointed him that way, that the autistic kids always have these restrictions in the neck veins. And then there was a follow-up article by me and Dr. Antonucci in 2019. They're all in the American Journal of Immunology. If you Google Klinghardt in that search engine that the journal has, or Dr. Antonucci, you will find the papers. So in multiple sclerosis, the neck veins are narrow because of retroviral infection. That leads to increased pressure. Blood pulses into the brain but can't come out, and you get oozing out of blood around the veins in the brain. And then the immune system cleans that up, but the iron residues from the hemoglobin, the fallout of iron, is incredibly corrosive and creates this demyelinating areas. They're always venocentric, they're always around the vein. And so there is a relationship between this more mechanical view of MS, what creates MS, and the retroviral theory. They both really belong together. And when you treat both, you treat the restrictions of the neck vein with the manual massage that I teach in other settings, the cream, and then a general antiretroviral therapy is a phenomenal aspect of treating MS. And I hope my MS patients are listening to this, because most of you have done parts of the treatment, but not the whole thing, and take way too many other things. Okay, so here an article on ALS suggesting that ALS may be a retroviral illness. And I like to say this, there was a physician in Canada in the 1990s who reported huge successes in the treatment of ALS by using the available antiretroviral drugs from the AIDS therapy, and had 8 cases of remission or significant improvement. And what did the Canadian government do with this brilliant publication? Well, they took his license away because nobody else could see the purpose of that. And so, unfortunately, the progress in medicine has been stifled very much by the very institutions that are supposed to protect patients. That's still going on everywhere. And so it's the K group of the human endogenous retroviruses that are suspected to be involved in the creation of ALS. And so if you have an ALS patient, that should be the first thing that you should look at. The second thing should be prion disease, which we also increasingly get a good handle on. Okay, so now we're getting to the chronic fatigue. And so I mentioned that before, when we look at Epstein-Barr and the connection to chronic fatigue, that only about half the patient with proven active Epstein-Barr have fatigue, and the other one does not. And according to Koch's criteria, that means it cannot be that Epstein-Barr is the actual cause of the fatigue, because it would cause it in everybody. And so Klinghardt's theory is because Epstein-Barr is activating the retroviruses, and most retroviruses are known to cause fatigue in people. That seems to be the most likely link. By the way, those of you who have religiously followed my Thursday seminars, my seminar on Wi-Fi, I show the article that a 6-minute phone call on your cell phone on your head will reactivate the dormant Epstein-Barr virus for up to 7 years. 6-minute phone call, 7 years fatigue. Is it really worth it? I don't know. Some of you would answer and say yes. The connection with chronic fatigue, the new word, just for us to communicate, the new word for chronic fatigue is no longer CFIDS, your chronic fatigue immune deficiency syndrome was the old term. The medical boards have instructed us we're no longer allowed to use that term. It now has to be called ME. That stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. A fancy term, but myalgic, means muscle aches, and encephalo means head, and myelitis means that the marrow, the spinal cord, and the big structures in the brain are inflamed, and that covers it pretty much. And so just remember, next time you see an ME patient, have the highlighted here in red, leading to the hypothesis for an active role of such retroviral and other repetitive elements with this disease. Yeah, man spricht, we always talk about retroviral elements here because these are sections of DNA that are identical to the retrovirus that it originally was. It's integrated in the DNA, and so now in our DNA is just an element, it's just a small section of it that can be activated the moment we are missing methyl groups. Let me give you an example of why the methyl groups. Yeah, so the methyl groups, CH3 groups, are stuck onto those elements and they cannot be transcribed that way. Let's assume you drive in a car, and in Seattle we have a couple of tunnels, and let's say there's a small earthquake and the traffic stops. Well, and you, like the Americans are, in Germany, people shut the engines off if that happens and wait out what happens. In America, everybody runs the engine in the tunnel, no matter what, because it can't be that toxic. Anyway, so you're inhaling now a bunch of carbon monoxide and other gases, and your body needs to dramatically quickly activate glutathione and other antioxidants. And when you ever looked at the biochemistry, there's the methylation cycle, and it spins out these methyl groups to silence the DNA, the viral DNA. But from the same cycle comes another pathway that actually creates the glutathione that you need as an antioxidative defense. And so you're stuck in the car tunnel, your body needs to make huge amounts of glutathione. It takes the methyl groups off the DNA and shoves it down the other pathway to make glutathione. And so the price is now you survive the gases in the tunnel, but 2 days later or 3 days later, I don't feel so well, I'm so tired, I need to sleep all the time. Yes, because now you activated the retroviruses that were dormant there for the last 30 years or 40 years or 50 years or 3 days or 5 weeks. You've created a mess, and so don't get stuck in car tunnels. The same, of course, applies to other stressful situations. For example, I have to fly a lot job-wise. Every time you fly, you're demethylating your viral DNA because you need huge amounts of methyl groups to survive the flight. Okay, so here I put a little bit of the literature together for you from other places. So the original work, Judy Mikovits has been my entire beautiful mentor in making me aware of retroviruses. She was part of our think tank that happened in 2006, 2007, 2008, somewhere in the mountains in California. There were only 12 of us there. Lee Cowden was there, and other friends. We all became close friends at the time. And Judy Mikovits was the one who introduced us to the importance of retroviruses. Her mentor is Frank Rossetti, which is mentioned up here. And both of them have been preaching that in chronic fatigue, we need to look at retroviral activity. And, some of you listening to this have chronic fatigue. Most of you listening to this have some fatigue. And I would dare to say some fatigue means some retroviral activity. A lot of fatigue means a lot of activity. I lost somebody very dear to me from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the numbers here, that the likelihood of when somebody has chronic fatigue, that the likelihood to develop later in life non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is 250 times higher. Remember, chronic fatigue equals retroviral activity, and that makes it 250 times higher to get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which suggests that it's not only Bartonella involved with non-Hodgkin's, but also retroviral activity. And every one of you dealing with non-Hodgkin, either as a patient or as a provider, please look at the retroviruses. I give you, later in this talk, we talk about the diagnostic tools that are available to us. Good, and then there is the link to cancer. And that's, of course, an ever-growing insight that many cancers are caused by retroviruses. The original work really was done by Judy Mikovits, who found in prostate cancer. Yeah, so there's two kinds of prostate cancer. You know, every one of us, I'm 70, and so everyone in our age group, when you do a biopsy of the prostate, you find some cancer cells, more or less. But only in 80% or almost 80% of the cases, this prostate never goes anywhere. It may grow slightly in size, but it doesn't metastasize. But in 23% it does. And Judy Mikovits found in those 23%, that group of patients that has the murine xenotropic murine retrovirus, XMRV. X stands for xenotropic, and then M for murine means for mice, and retroviruses. And she was beaten half to death with, she documented that in the book Plague. Her career, for discovering retroviruses in cancer, that was an inconvenient truth, because many of the same viruses that are implied in cancer are also found in the vaccines. And so there was an interest from high above in silencing her. And the story I'm not going to tell you here, but it's a shocking story. And the second book, Plague of Corruption, that Judy Mikovits wrote, I believe is a must read. It mentions Anthony Fauci in there and several others, and the truth about the gang that sort of has ruled medicine in the US. So I put the other study here. So XMRV is present in malignant prostatic epithelium and is associated with prostate cancer. And this is from the National Academy of Sciences. That means it's no longer the thing that should be disputed. It's just a fact. Of course, it was taken apart later by the special interest, but it stands, and we're getting into some interesting areas now. So here's some of the studies on MS. Strong link to retroviral activity. And then we get to breast cancer. So until 10 years ago, I thought breast cancer mostly was Epstein-Barr virus or had a certain toxic background, which is all true, but we didn't know how much breast cancer is associated with retroviral activity. And I'll show you, I get into a little bit inconvenient area now. I hope that some of Big Brother is not watching this one. So I put the key sentence up there. As many as 37% of breast cancer cases may be attributed to exposure to the so-called RV bovine leukemia virus, RV retroviral bovine leukemia virus. And so what the paper showed is that the entire milk supply in the US is contaminated with active retroviruses. That means the milk that comes out of the cow, the yogurt that's made from it, the cheese that's made from it, has retroviral elements in it that can spring to life the moment you eat it. And so, and unfortunately, in the paper, when you read the comments on the fine print, it comes to the conclusion there is probably not a single cow in the US that is not retrovirally infected. The cows are healthy that carry this, but the live virus is found in the milk products that come out, and the same virus is found in 37% of all women with breast cancer in the US, which I'm not a vegan. I love cheese, and I'm not going to give it up easily. I don't know the statistics in Europe, if the European cheeses are safer. Certainly, it looks like sheep and goat cheese is a lot safer than anything from the cow. And so I know this is an inconvenient truth where I could be murdered for. I hope not, but it's the study stance, and the interest in that has been squished by, there's been some really nasty attempts by the dairy industry to squish this knowledge, but it's out there. And so those of you who are dealing with breast cancer, use at least our retroviral DVD for testing and do some of the follow-up tests that I'm suggesting to see if you get good evidence of that, because that should be part of breast cancer treatment, at least in my opinion, on my experience, in 50% of breast cancer cases. There's other retroviruses which can also contribute to breast cancer. Yeah, this is just one of them that has been traced carefully. Good, and then we have an endless slew of articles on autoimmune disease. Some I mentioned already, like rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, Sjogren syndrome. But here, this uncomfortable article on diabetes type 1. There is now an increasing library of articles on the link of diabetes type 1 and retroviral activity. And so I have my first cases not in the US, I'm not going to say in which countries, of where moms called me and say, listen, my 4-year-old has just been, he went to the bathroom 15 times at night. We had him tested. He's diabetic. What shall we do? And we put him on our retroviral treatment. Some of the things I already said, and there's a whole slew of things. And within 6 months, we got control of it, where the child is no longer insulin dependent. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Okay, and then down here, we're going now to the CCSVI, chronic cerebrospinal vascular insufficiency. It's that narrowing of the anterior neck veins linked to HERVs, human endogenous retroviruses, as a causation of that. And I wonder if I have, no, I don't have the picture in here. I'm sorry. I was hoping I would. So I think I disclosed the treatment already. Yeah, we have an antiretroviral cream. It's called Sophia Flow in America. It's called Circulation Cream in the UK. They're different, but they both have the same target and they're used the same way. Good, rheumatoid arthritis is mostly the K group of the endogenous retroviruses. Those of you who treat rheumatoid arthritis, it's not easy. And it's never been easy because we didn't know about the retroviruses. And I promise you, you will see some surprising rapid results if you combine whatever else you're doing already that may be moderately successful if you bring in our antiretroviral therapy. Yeah. So Sjogren syndrome, now Sjogren's is the dry eyes, the dry sinuses and dry mouth. I have fantastic results with that, simply injecting DMPS into the submandibular ganglion, the otic ganglion, the sphenopalatine ganglion. And we've had numerous cases of complete resolution with that. So there is a link with either mercury or in any of the other sulfhydryl affinitive metals that gets into the autonomic nervous system of the head and then causes autoimmunity. And however, it seems to attract the retroviruses. And so retroviruses, by the way, and mercury, we find very, very often in the same body compartments. So it's another little clinical pearl. Okay, lupus I already mentioned. Good, and then it gets even a little bit more uncomfortable. ADHD, Every kid that we see here in England has some aspect of attention deficit and learning problems and learning differences, like we call it here politely. And some kids have social problems now, social anxieties. And what we find consistently among those kids is activity of the retroviruses. And here from the abstract, human endogenous retroviruses may represent a link amongst these factors and the clinical phenotype of ADHD. I leave it there, so it's just to give you some food for thought. Huge link with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, we always knew it's an infection from the way it behaves in families and the way it can travel from mom to the child or from dad to the child. And so we've found that there is now a larger number. This is like I put this together 2 years ago. So every week or almost, sometimes every day, there is a new article on retroviruses where else they have been found. And what the authors don't dare to say is, well, okay, if you find retroviruses in schizophrenia, is this schizophrenia causing conditions that invites the retroviruses to be there? Or is this the retroviral activation that causes the schizophrenia? And I can say for sure it's the latter. Yeah. And then the inflammatory brain diseases. Now, this is, of course, my favorite chapter in medicine. There is no one right now, none amongst the 700 people or so listening right now, is exempt from this. We all have low-grade or not so low-grade inflammation in the brain. Yeah, and if it gets severe, then we give it a name, Parkinson's or insomnia or memory decline. But if it's mild, we know privately we're not ticking quite as well in the brain as we did before. That's not degeneration in general, it's inflammation. Yeah, and so here the beautiful statistics that whenever there is inflammation in the brain, there's a 3 to 9-fold increase in the levels of the RNA, the objective measured RNA levels of certain retroviruses, and increased elevated reverse transcriptase, as a marker for this. And so whenever you have to do brain work and deal with inflammation in the brain, you have to silence the inflammation. I give you right here sort of the 3 or 4 biggies. The biggest one is bicaline. Bicaline is an extract from skullcap, and in Austria, BioPure has it under the name Retrobi. In America, BioPure has it under the name bicaline. It's an absolute huge tool that needs to be used in pretty high amounts. A teaspoon 2-3 times a day wouldn't be a lot. And then the other 2 are luteolin and PEA. I speak about those later in this course, but these are bioflavonoids found in many plants. Broccoli sprout extract, again, that's in the US, it's a BioPure product. In England is Key Science. Key Science has all of the things that I'm talking about here in a very, very pure form, organic and super harvest that is observed from the harvest to the moment it gets to the patient. Everything is observed very, very carefully. Broccoli sprouts contain a lot of luteolin, and so my favorite combo for the brain in general is to use skullcap tincture and broccoli sprout extract. That's a fantastic duo, those two. Okay, so here is that link between retroviruses and autism. This is a side note. We believe that's the reason Jeff Bradstreet died. He was our main leader in leading us how to treat retroviruses and making the link very, very strongly that autism really is at the core is a retroviral illness, and that we need to silence the retroviruses in autism. And some of you were there. The original retroviral remedy was GCMAF. That was then viciously attacked by the pharma industry using the military in really evil ways. Then it was a compound that was isolated that would still have the similar activity, was called Rerum. Now that was blocked. The man creating it was simply without accusation. Dr. Reinwald was put into jail. He still is in jail after 4 years or 5 years without proper accusation in Germany, failing legal system over there. And so it's an inconvenient truth that autism is a retroviral illness, and but it's most likely not an endogenous retrovirus, but an acquired one. And the main source of acquiring retroviruses in childhood are the vaccines. I give you the literature on that. I have to withhold my own opinion on that. Good. You can read up the literature on your own. I know I'm reminded of the time. I just want to maybe do this last page here, and I hope I got you excited enough that you will follow with the follow-up lectures that you get every Thursday now. I think next Thursday we may interrupt and talk more about specifically about the liver. I don't know that yet, but in the next few weeks you get the full length of the talk. We get into using medical diagnostic tools, and we get certainly into the treatment with all biological compounds that actually work. But here's my last page I want to go through today. Why do retroviruses become activated? We talked about the Epstein-Barr virus, herpes type 6, and cytomegalomy being activators of this virus. Here's another study that is mentioned here. Yeah, and the other one is herpes simplex type 2. I mentioned it was 4 viruses that are known to activate retroviruses. And many of the symptoms that we falsely attribute to these viruses are actually caused by the retroviruses that are activated. Now, I've seeped through the literature and through the toxicology literature. It is also known that many aspects of the microwave radiation disable our methylation method and our histone acetylation. It messes with the very mechanisms that we need to silence retroviral DNA that's in our system. Yeah? And so we know that one of the biggest treatments that I'm offering to my patients is a complete hygiene around microwave. You're not allowed to have a Wi-Fi router in the house. You need to have wired connection. You're only allowed to use your cell phone on loudspeaker as far away from you as you can, if you must use a cell phone. And there's other aspects, regarding your sleep situation, the sleep sanctuary, and other things that we discussed in the Wi-Fi course. Nanonized aluminum has been shown to activate sections of the DNA that are viral sequences and retroviral sequences. And so is glyphosate, and so is mercury. Yeah, so one of the big pieces that we've been doing more intuitively over the last 40 years, that we realized any of the chronic illnesses that we've seen that have elements of chronic fatigue, chronic pain, insomnia, brain fog, the complex of things that we intuitively always said, okay, we need to detox glyphosate, we need to detox aluminum, we need to detox mercury, we need to put them on antivirals. You remember Epstein-Barr is licorice, the herpes type 6, it's garlic. It's not that difficult. Yeah, we need to put people on just general programs to push things a certain way that we were actually silencing retroviruses we did not know. Yeah, and so also I write down here at the bottom that Lyme disease we found is a huge trigger for activation of the retroviruses. And I being reminded of the time, I'm sorry that we didn't get very far, but we got somewhere. I like to say, and I'll show you the literature next time, that whenever you get an insect bite, whether it's a spider bite, a flea bite, a lice, or a tick bite that gives you Lyme disease or Bartonella or Babesia, most of the arthropods, the biting insects, also carry so-called insect retroviruses, that they're transferred with the same tick bite, with the same insect bite. And many of the symptoms that I see in chronic Lyme disease have nothing to do with Borrelia or Bartonella or Babesia. They're pure symptoms of retroviral activity and need to be treated completely differently. as retroviral illnesses. And so, we have, since the blessing of disulfiram, we have a pretty sure-footed way of saying, is this actually Borrelia or is it Borrelia plus other things? So the Borrelia we can really nicely knock out now in 3-4 months by giving an adequate dose of disulfiram. But if the disulfiram doesn't work, then the symptoms that the patient has are no longer caused by Borrelia, they're caused by something else. And yes, it could be Bartonella, it could be, you give methylene blue and maybe something else, or it could be Babesia, which we treat with Artemisia annua. And but if you're still left with a whole set of symptoms, please try to diagnose retroviruses and treat that. It's the most overlooked part in Lyme disease. And for some reason, I wasn't always popular with ILADs. I love ILADs and the work ILADs has done with Lyme disease, but I was always considered an inconvenient outsider who has stupid ideas. But I would urge all of you who treat Lyme disease, please don't be too hard on yourself. If you're failing your patient with Lyme disease, most likely it's a retroviruses that are activated by the Lyme disease. It means it's still Lyme disease, but it's an expansion, an extension of what we know about Lyme disease, that there is a nasty group of retroviruses working in the background that are collectively immunosuppressive and then invite 1,000 other problems in, the parasites, the mold sensitivity, the throat infections, the bladder infections, whatever comes in. And by simply focusing early on including treating the retroviruses, you will make much more rapid progress. So yes, in the next Thursdays, over the next few weeks, we'll get through the retroviruses, write some good notes, and then through Klinghardt Institute, you will be able to buy the PowerPoint. It's inexpensive, but it's like, so we need to source our research and the work that we do on the desk when we don't make money seeing patients. We still have to finance a lot of things. So you can purchase the PowerPoint and it will lead you into a whole new area of medicine beautifully. And now for those of you at the beginning who couldn't hear, we will offer through Sophia Health Institute a new update on the liver flush. Keeping the liver clean, that means the liver cells, they have to absorb toxins from the blood and then process them and shove them out the other end into the biliary system, and that goes into the gut. And if the biliary system, like in most of us, with the current environmental influences, most of us have a blocked biliary system. That means the bile is not flowing like water, it's more like glue. And we have developed a concise method that we will teach in 12 sessions over a 12-day period. That's, I think, starting on February 5th. And so I urge all of you to play with us and engage with us. Let's do the liver flush together. All of you who know me, who trust me to some degree. It's a 12-day program. It's a fairly short section every day for 12 days. And towards the end, we actually will do together as a group, we'll do the liver flush. And there is some live parts in this. It's largely our guide is going to be Dr. Ko, who is my trusted doctor who works with me since a few years, and Kim Todd. Some of you know her. She is an exceptional human being who lives by the liver flush and by the colon hydrotherapy and by the coffee enemas. And so we will very concisely introduce these steps to you. And I consider that today, the current environment with COVID-19 is cleared through the liver. And if the liver is working, you will not know that you ever had the illness. But if your liver is plugged up, you will know that you have an illness, and it can be very severe. So we updated the liver flush to tweak it to the requirements that we have right now. And please join us with that. Daniela will give you instructions of how to find that on the online. And until next Thursday, see you guys. Bye.